Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride, and joining us tonight on the line is Douglas Chapman MP, the SNP MP for Dunfermline and West Fife. Douglas, are you there?
I am indeed, yes. Good evening.
Okay, we've just not quite got you up on the screen yet, but we will get there in a second.
Right.
So our first story tonight is regarding Professor Clara Ponsati, following the sentencing of the 9 Catalan political prisoners to a total of 100 years in prison. A new European arrest warrant has been executed by Spain for Professor Clara Ponsati for the crime of sedition, relating to her involvement in the peaceful independence referendum of 2017. She is set to appear at St Leonard's Police Office in Edinburgh on Thursday with her lawyer Amar Anwar, where she will be detained, arrested and transferred to Edinburgh Sheriff Court for a hearing at which her legal team will apply for bail. She's due to face only the charge of sedition, which she utterly refutes. If extradited and convicted, she could face a sentence of up to 15 years. The warrant is viewed by campaigners for Catalan independence and human rights as a systematic attempt to criminalise the fight for independence by over 2 million Catalan voters. It will be argued by Clara's legal team that there is no guarantee of a right to a fair trial in Spain, where most members of the Catalan government are already in prison or in exile. Clara Ponsati believes that the charges are part of a politically motivated prosecution and submits that her extradition would be unjust and incompatible with her human rights. The extradition is going to be opposed robustly, and it's her intent to put on trial the Spanish justice system, as well as its politicians who have interfered with due process. She has said that she's deeply grateful for the support she's received from across Scotland, Europe, and her beloved Catalonia. She says she is taking on the might of the Spanish state and remains resolute, determined to fight, and believes that Spain will never be able to crush the spirit of the Catalan people. And Douglas, what do you make of this story then?
Well, I think it's deeply disturbing for a start that one of our citizens here is actually being taken to court in this way with a European arrest warrant. It's quite clear that the charges that were brought by the Spanish government and the trial that's happened in Madrid has been a complete and utter charade. From my point of view and what I saw when I was in Barcelona on the 1st of October, it was quite clear then that most of the violence, in fact, probably 100% of the violence, was actually coming from the state police instructed by Madrid. And it was quite clear at that time that, the people of Catalonia were acting in a peaceful and democratic manner. And to have these charges brought forward, not only to those who are serving in the government, but also those who are exiled in either Brussels or in Scotland, is quite outrageous.
And what can you as an MP and what can the Scottish Government do to try and help with this situation? Is there anything that you can do?
Well, we've been trying to keep as much pressure as possible through the House of Commons in Westminster. I've been working very closely with the all-party group on Catalonia, and there's some great members that we have in that. Hywa Williams, who is one of the Plaid Cymru. Hello, can you hear me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. I beg your pardon. Right. Okay. So the Hywa Williams is the chair of the group, and he's a Plaid Cymru MP. But we have people from across the political divide, Conservatives and Labour members as well. And since all this has kicked off, really, we've had an upsurge in the number of MPs who have taken an interest in this matter, not from a point of view maybe supporting Catalan independence, but they see it very much as a human rights issue. And the fact that elected politicians are being taken to court and convicted for what is a huge number of years per person, never mind the total you gave earlier, is really quite. I think it's touching a real raw nerve in terms of our respect for democracy in Scotland in particular. And can I say also that there's been several Scottish members as well who have taken a huge role in this, and Ronnie Cowan, for example, and from Inverclyde, and also Gavin from Paisley North, I think it is. I think they've put in a power of work as well behind the scenes to try and put right this dreadful wrong that's we're witnessing in Catalonia.
Mm-hmm. Well, we will keep up to date with that as that goes on. What do you think of the timing of this? Do you think this has anything to do with the fact that there is an election going on here just now?
Well, certainly I think the government in Spain it's changed hands a few times since 2016 when the Catalans had their referendum. We're trying to put as much pressure as we can on Jeremy Corbyn, who we believe is a good mate of President Sanchez in Spain. But as we speak, no action has been taken on that front. But I think it would make a huge difference if Sanchez is elected in November, and if he wins that election, then I think we should be beating a path to Jeremy Corbyn's door as well to say, you've got long established links with Mr. Sanchez, so it's maybe time that you called in a few favours in terms of what could be done in Catalonia. But I think there is a connection between obviously the election and the fact that maybe the current president in Spain wants to appear really, really tough to the Spanish electorate. So I think he's taken his chance to actually flex his muscles a bit, and Spain flexing their legal muscles to actually sort of undermine the case for Clara and by issuing the European arrest warrant.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for that. We will obviously keep up to date with this story as it progresses, but now we have to move on to something that I'm sure you know a lot about, Douglas. This is the general election. And today, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has called for the devolved nations to have sign-off over any future trade deals. She said today, a vote for the SNP is a vote to escape Brexit and for Scotland's right to choose our own future with independence. Because the reality is that Brexit is far from a done deal. Even if Boris Johnson was to get his deal passed, that would only be the beginning, not the end, of trade talks with the EU. EU trade negotiations with other countries have taken many years to complete, and regardless of what happens now, the issue of Brexit is certain to dominate Westminster politics for many years to come. We're already sick of Brexit. We don't want it to go on another 10 years or more. So Scotland must not face a lost decade of Brexit chaos that we didn't vote for. And I'm sure, as someone who's been right in the thick of the Brexit chaos for the last couple of years, Douglas, that's a sentiment you would agree with.
Well, absolutely. I think we've already lost 3 years of our lives here, talking about Brexit since the Brexit referendum. And it just, as you say, it seems to go on, and without any resolution or any sense that the UK negotiators actually know what they're doing. I think the call made by Nicola today is absolutely spot on. I think Scotland does need that voice at the table, and it's a voice that has been to date has been rejected time and time again. In 2016 or after the referendum, the SNP did put forward their case and Scotland's future in Europe, and you're trying to be part of the negotiations. And I've been speaking to quite a few friends and some of my neighbours here as well, just to pick up on how they're feeling about things just now. And as you say, everybody's totally fed up with Brexit, but it's not just that; it's the way that it's been handled. And I'm sure, if perhaps there'd been maybe a different prime minister with maybe a different kind of attitude and way of dealing with people, we could actually make some progress here. But the way that both Theresa May and Boris Johnson are handling negotiations and handling the internal negotiations with the United Kingdom, it means that Scotland's voice is pushed to one side, it's dismissed, it's ignored. And, if we are a family of nations, if we are, our voices to be respected, then, as we were told in 2014, then something has to give on the negotiating side as far as the UK is concerned. But and I wish Nicola well. I'm not holding up very much hope that things will actually change, because unless the actual personalities change around the negotiating team from the UK, and I think we're stuck where we are for a long, long time.
Well, what we have heard around the transition period today, when asked if MPs would be allowed to vote on a Brexit transition extension, a Downing Street spokesman today told journalists the answer to that is a simple no. We aren't extending the implementation period. There is no reason whatsoever why we will not secure a deal by that date. Both the UK and the EU are committed to reaching a trade agreement by that date, and that is what we are going to do. So this is something that we had heard, that there would be an opportunity to extend the transition period if a further trade agreement couldn't be reached. But now the Tories are saying that that is definitely not going to happen. Michael Gove made the same comments on the Today programme today. What's your feeling about that? Do you think this is do you think this is a reason or a way to get a no deal Brexit just further down the line, or do you think there is a genuine confidence that a deal can be reached in the relatively short time frame available?
Yeah, well, certainly the way you describe it, it sounds like die in a ditch 2.0, doesn't it? We're going to get to another point towards the end of January, and perhaps a deal at that time will not be done, and perhaps we'll be in a position where a no deal will for some would seem an attractive option. Obviously, that's not an attractive option for anybody in Scotland. But I think the other thing as well, that if we get to that stage, I sense as well that people in the rest of Europe are really getting quite fed up with the UK and their attitude to their whole European project. I sense that there's a level of real frustration now with the British, because it's not just about the fact that Brexit has not been a done deal. It's the fact that Brexit is now getting in the way of other things that the EU 27 want to try and achieve. So if they're spending so much of their time locked into Brexit discussions, then it's taken away their focus, their interest in what they actually want to try and achieve as a 27. So I think that's part of the problem as we get to perhaps the end of January. We'll wait and see what the general election brings. If that brings a change of good sense to all concerned, whether it's a Jeremy Corbyn-led government, or whether it's a government where Boris Johnson might not even win his seat. I think he's on fairly shaky ground as far as his own constituency is concerned. So we could end up with a situation where the Conservatives actually win the election, but Boris Johnson, it's impossible for him to continue as Prime Minister because he's no longer a Member of Parliament. So there's lots of things to play for here, and that's why it's really important that people in Scotland realise that this is about our future. The future that we want for our kids, and the future that we want for our nation, and that's why while there's some criticism of not another mandate, but we need to build up this case bit by bit and build up the momentum behind moving towards an independence referendum next year. And the more SNP members who are returned in this election, then for me that strengthens that case and builds that momentum that we need to move on to independence. And it's becoming increasingly clear to me that people who were even no voters before, or were a bit undecided, a lot of them are coming across to the idea, we probably would be better off independent than remaining within the UK and having an uncertain future over the next 10, 15 years.
Mm-hmm. So there's also today, The Guardian published a leaked internal Tory party document which says that Conservative candidates in the general election should not sign up to specific pledges on protecting the NHS from privatisation and trade deals, or on tackling climate change. The 11-page briefing note explains the party positions on 9 key areas and strongly advises prospective Tory MPs against signing up to any pledges unless they have been agreed from the centre. However, supporting shooting is allowed as an important part of rural life, says the document. The briefing sets out why signing up to certain pledges are unnecessary and could backfire, but the demands are likely to be seized on by opposition leaders who insist the party cannot be trusted to keep its promises on certain important issues. The document is titled Issue Campaign Responses. It gives an insight into how candidates will be expected to stick to a strict script with little wriggle room beyond the template responses provided to them. So the issues on which they've been told to avoid signing up to pledges include trade deals, which would include the NHS. It says this kind of pledge would give credence to factually inaccurate smears, the NHS is not for sale. It says candidates should focus instead on Jeremy Corbyn's attempt to override the British people on Brexit. On climate change, they've been told that many campaigns contain unrealistic targets that would be impossible to achieve, and that it would be better to focus on practical, reasonable steps to protect our planet while keeping bills down. The women's state pension age is not to be discussed, and neither is standing up for Brexit. The memo says it's unnecessary to pledge to stand up for Brexit because a Conservative government with a functioning majority will immediately get Brexit done. So what do you think about this tight leash that the Tory candidates are being put on, Douglas?
Well, I think they've certainly learned a lesson from the Liberal Democrats, who I think we all remember Liberal Democrat candidates going around the country signing pledges about student fees, and I think even the leader signed a big card with his signature on it. That Clegg, against increasing student fees and so on. So I think they're learning the lessons not to let their candidates off the leash in terms of areas that might be of real concern. But to go through an election with candidates not speaking about the NHS in England and not speaking about Brexit is it's just beyond belief. And obviously they're really running scared, I think. Not just off the record in government, but also if they can't trust their own candidates to have a view on the issues of the day, then you've got to wonder why they're standing for election in the first place. But so they're obviously exceptionally scared that somebody will put their real big size 10s into this because they have so much. This government has so much to try and defend due to the not just the previous Prime Minister but also this Prime Minister as well and their record in government. So it's actually given all the opposition candidates a real crib sheet to work on, because if anybody's caught up in hustings, then these are the very things that people will want to talk about. And if we've got somebody from the Conservative Party who's exceptionally quiet on some of these issues, then I'm sure the audience will be aware of that, and they'll go for the jugular in any hustings that come around.
And you mentioned the Lib Dems there. They had their campaign launch today with Jo Swinson claiming that she could be the next Prime Minister. In reality, senior Lib Dems say privately that even doubling their current tally of 20 MPs would count as a significant success, meaning a more realistic outcome would be to hold the balance of power in a hung parliament. So this is obviously the chances of the Lib Dems becoming the new government is rather slim, and a big chunk of those 20 were not even elected as Lib Dems but have joined from elsewhere. So what do you make of the Lib Dems' chances in this? Do you think Jo Swinson could be the next Prime Minister or potentially the next Kingmaker?
Well, the issue I think is I think they are trying to position themselves as the third party. They're obviously getting some media attention as being the third party when they're actually quite a minor party in Parliament, which is a bit annoying from an SNP perspective, because we've been fighting the case for since in a big way since 2015 with our larger group of MPs. I think the Lib Dems are trying to create a situation that is quite dangerous, because it could backfire big time on Jo Swinson, because I think they'll still end up probably as the fourth party. We can't probably prejudge the outcome of the election, but I think it would take a huge effort on behalf of the Liberal Democrats to, as you say, even double their current number. And that current number have mainly been through defections from other parties. So whether they've got the boots on the ground and the political nous to actually wrest some seats from either Labour or Conservatives in some parts of the country is open to conjecture, let's say. But I think they're also in a weak position in Scotland as well. If they hang on to what they've got, I think they'll be doing exceptionally well. And I know we've got some really good, strong candidates in the seats where Lib Dems are currently hold. So good luck to all of these guys as well, and hopefully they can work on their majorities and make sure that we can maybe win a few back from the Lib Dems in these circumstances. And
the SNP has spoken a little bit. Of course, the Lib Dems have talked about some sort of Remain alliance, or some sort of kind of non-aggression pact between parties in seats where they could win by consolidating the Remain vote. That doesn't extend to the Labour Party, apparently. They've said that the Labour Party are standing on a manifesto that's going to be about delivering Brexit, and that's not something that they can support. But meanwhile, Kirsty Blackman, the SNP deputy leader at Westminster, said Jo Swinson's remarks once again reveal her true colours and the grim fact that the Lib Dems would help keep Boris Johnson in office in return for a sniff of power. People in communities across Scotland have not forgotten the devastation Jo Swinson caused the last time she went into government with the Tories. This was a record she said she was proud to be a part of. The Lib Dems have propped up the Tories before, and they would do it again at the drop of a hat. What do you make of those comments? Is this something that people have to be concerned about, or do you think the Remain-Leave divide is enough to keep the Lib Dems from working with the Tories again?
Well, I think that's been the mood music for a while, that the Lib Dems would be in a position that if the Tories were looking for some support after the election, just to allow them to be a functioning government, that the Lib Dems would sort of back the Tories in that respect. And she's come out, I think, in the last 24 hours and said that there's no way that they would back a Corbyn-led government. So it's obviously the direction of travel that Jo Swinson, probably a Conservative at heart, and I think we've had enough examples in the past as well with the Nick Clegg, David Cameron government, that coalition government where the Lib Dems time and time again voted to disadvantage some of the most disadvantaged people in the country. Like when you look in some detail at Jo Swinson's record, or voting record, it's not an impressive record that they could possibly sell in Scotland. And I think anybody who's standing against Jo Swinson and the Berkshire, they should be actually homing in on that as hard as they can to make sure that people know what kind of person they're voting for in that area.
We did actually meet Amy Callaghan. She was on the show a couple of weeks ago, and I think having met her, she will be fighting tooth and nail in East Dunbartonshire. Just finally on the general election, Jeremy Corbyn today accused Boris Johnson of seeking to hijack Brexit to unleash a Thatcherite bonfire of regulation that would usher in what he cast as a much harsher brand of American-style capitalism. So he was in Harlow today campaigning and told supporters that what Boris Johnson's Conservatives want is to hijack Brexit to unleash Thatcherism on steroids. He said a vote for Johnson's Conservatives is a vote to betray our NHS in a sellout to Trump. He said to chants of not for sale from the audience. So exactly what the Tories are not to talk about, Jeremy Corbyn is putting front and centre here. How serious is this concern that the NHS will be sacrificed in an attempt to get a trade deal with the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are huge concerns, and I don't think it's just the NHS. I think in terms of regulation around food, I think environmental protections, there's 101 things that can be pushed away as part of a trade deal, and I think it's a real concern that. And I think Corbyn's right, but we are headed for that kind of future unless we do something about it and make sure that at least we in Scotland can take a different path. We can choose a different way forward for our own country and for our own people, and make sure that when it comes to trade deals that. We will try and protect these environmental protections we've had through the EU. We'll make sure that in terms of importing food and indeed our exporting of real good quality food and drink, which is a mainstay of the Scottish economy. We need to play real hardball when it comes to these deals as well. And obviously, it's a lot easier if you're already a member of a big bloc like the EU, where you can actually use their muscle, if you like, to make sure that these standards are upheld when it comes to trade deals in the future. But one thing I would disagree with Corbyn on as well is that the lack of leadership that he has shown throughout the last 3 years has been palpable. I think I think it's been difficult watching some of the Labour MPs on the benches, not even knowing which way they're going to vote seconds, minutes before they actually troop through the lobbies, because the Labour position has been so complicated and riven with indecision for all that period of time, and it's never been actually clear what the Labour's position is on Brexit throughout the whole process. And I think that. I think the Labour position, in Scotland has sometimes been at odds with what Jeremy Corbyn's looking for, and when it comes to independence and things like that as well, then we're getting different messages from different parts of the Labour Party, and I think that's a real, for me, if I was an ordinary voter, I think that'd be a recipe for disaster in terms of why would I put trust in the Labour Party when they are so indecisive about the way forward for the country as a whole. And I think that's being reflected in some of the polling that's been done. We're seeing Labour, bumping along 20%, maybe a bit more than that. Some polls, sometimes a bit less, depending on the area. But they're not in a position where you would expect them to come through and take on the running of the country. And I don't think Jeremy Corbyn's a Prime Minister in waiting. But we're now, as from 12 o'clock tomorrow, we're totally in the hands of the electorate in Scotland and in the rest of the UK, and it's up to them to make their choice, make their decision. But I think there should be a real strong call in Scotland to say that this is a chance for us to really to make our voice heard, and to choose a different path. And I think that just gives a real strong boost to everybody who wants to see independence in Scotland, and make sure that we can actually deliver it this time and get the yes vote over the 50% mark, and hopefully a lot more than that in the referendum when it comes in 2020.
And Douglas, I know we do have to let you go very shortly, but just before you do go, this is a story about food banks. The UK Tory government has been condemned for burying its head in the sand over the impact of their brutal austerity agenda. The report, The State of Hunger, by the Trussell Trust, concluded that the welfare reforms conducted by the Tory government, including universal credit, benefits sanctions, the benefits freeze and the bedroom tax, which of course has been mitigated in full in Scotland by the Scottish Government, have all been a key factor in the dramatic increase in food bank use and extreme poverty in the UK over the past 7 years. The report also highlights the steep increase in the number of food banks, with the number of food banks run just by the Trussell Trust rising from 65 in 2011 to 1,200 at the beginning of 2019. What do you make of these statistics and this laying of the blame at the door of the Tories?
Well, again, if you had 5 minutes with my caseworker, I think she would make it perfectly clear to everyone that the universal credit system that's been rolled out in Scotland has just been an absolute disaster. And we've had people in the office in tears, wondering how they would get through the next few days. Never mind, looking forward to a more positive future for them and their family. I think the other thing as well is, I think like most SNP MPs, we've been really supportive of our local food banks. I've got a really good relationship with the one in Dunfermline, and it's been one of my key charities, if you like, over the last 12 months, and we've been doing lots of collections for them. But I mean, you just see not even people who are at the depths of despair. It's a lot of people who have got jobs, who maybe some very low paid ones, and they're trying to keep their family together. They're trying to do the best they can for their kids, and it's quite heartbreaking that we live in a wealthy country, and we are putting people through this misery just through our own government's policy in terms of the UK. And the more that we can devolve and take control over the benefits system in Scotland, then I think that will be a very happy day where we can actually have a much fairer system when people fall on hard times.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Douglas, very much for joining us. I know you have to go now, so do enjoy your last few hours as an MP before the campaign officially goes 100%. And good luck with your campaign as well, of course.
Thanks very much, and maybe see you on the other side. Thanks a lot.
I certainly hope so. Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
And back in Holyrood, Scottish Greens West Scotland MSP Ross Greer led a debate in the Scottish Parliament this evening following the withdrawal of a planning application by Flamingo Land and Scottish Enterprise for a large tourist development on the shores of Loch Lomond. Mr Greer's campaign in opposition to the proposal resulted in almost 60,000 objections, making this the most unpopular planning application in Scotland's history. Flamingo Land still hold an exclusivity agreement with Scottish Enterprise for a section of the land and have suggested that they will resubmit their plans. Greer recently attended a community meeting in Balloch where alternative ideas for the site were put forward by local residents and suggestions were made to attempt a community buyout of the land. And speaking ahead of the debate earlier today, Ross Greer said, "I'm delighted to have secured parliamentary time to discuss the future of Balloch and Loch Lomond. It was clear at the recent community meeting that local residents are bursting with alternative ideas for the site, which would preserve its natural beauty, protect wildlife and support the local economy. There's a real appetite for making Loch Lomond a centre for ecotourism in particular, and Balloch can play a key role in that, especially if the kind of 21st century public transport systems we discussed were also delivered." The debate will be an opportunity to thank the Save Loch Lomond campaign and local residents for their work in holding off Flamingo Land, and to highlight the exclusive agreement the company still has on purchasing rights for the West Riverside and Drumkinnon Woods. I look forward to asking the Scottish Government to respond to our concerns about that agreement and to recognise the community's desire that any development should benefit the local area, not a company based hundreds of miles away. Our national parks are not the playthings of rich developers willing to bully local communities. This isn't an isolated incident. Flamingo Land's attempt to wreck the tranquility of Loch Lomond is just the tip of the iceberg. If the SNP hadn't worked hand in glove with the Tories to vote down the Green amendments to the recent planning bill, local communities might have been able to even the odds. It is for them to explain why they sided with developers over residents. The Save Loch Lomond campaign, following the debate today, thanked Ross Greer for introducing the debate and told Broadcasting Scotland that they felt Mary Goujon's response on behalf of the Scottish Government was encouraging. However, the campaign does continue as there has always been a concern that plans for Flamingo Land will be resubmitted soon. On the global stage, the world's people face untold suffering due to the climate crisis unless there are major transformations to global society, according to a stark warning from more than 11,000 scientists. We declare clearly and unequivocally that planet Earth is facing a climate emergency, it states. To secure a sustainable future, we must change how we live. This entails major transformations in the ways our global society functions and interacts with natural ecosystems. There is no time to lose, the scientists say. The climate crisis has arrived and is accelerating faster than most scientists expected. It is more severe than anticipated, threatening natural ecosystems and the fate of humanity. The statement is published in the journal Bioscience on the 40th anniversary of the first world climate crisis, which was held in Geneva in 1979. The statement was a collaboration of dozens of scientists and was endorsed by a further 11,000 from 153 different nations. The scientists say the urgent changes needed included ending population growth, leaving fossil fuels in the ground, halting forest destruction, and slashing meat eating. A key aim of the warning is to set out a full range of vital sign indicators of the causes and effects of climate breakdown, rather than only carbon emissions and surface temperature rise. A broader set of indicators should be monitored, including human population growth, meat consumption, tree cover loss, energy consumption, fossil fuel subsidies, and annual economic losses due to extreme weather events, said co-author Thomas Newsome of the University of Sydney. Other profoundly troubling signs from human activities selected by the scientists include booming air passenger numbers and world GDP growth. The climate crisis is closely linked to excessive consumption of the wealthy lifestyle, they said. As a result of these human activities, there are especially disturbing trends of increasing land and ocean temperatures, rising sea levels, and extreme weather events, the scientists said. Despite 40 years of global climate negotiations, with few exceptions, we have largely failed to address this predicament. Especially worrisome are potential irreversible climate tipping points. These climate chain reactions could cause significant disruptions to ecosystems, society, and economies, potentially making large areas of Earth uninhabitable. We urge widespread use of the vital signs to allow policymakers and the public to understand the magnitude of the crisis, realign priorities, and track progress. They set out a series of urgently needed actions, including using energy far more efficiently and applying strong carbon taxes to cut fossil fuel use, stabilising the global population, which is currently growing by 200,000 people per day, using ethical approaches such as longer education for girls, end the destruction of nature and restore forests and mangroves to help absorb CO2, eat mostly plants and less meat and reduce food waste, and shift economic goals away from GDP growth. The good news is that such transformative change with social and economic justice for all promises far greater human well-being than does business as usual, the scientists said. The recent surge of concern was encouraging, they added, from the global school strike to lawsuits against polluters and some nations and businesses starting to respond. In the USA, testimony by two of the three amigos charged with running Ukraine policy for President Donald Trump will be made public today as Democratic-led congressional committees release more transcripts from their impeachment investigation. Representative Adam Schiff, chairman of the House of Representatives Intelligence Committee, told reporters yesterday that transcripts would be released of interviews with Kurt Volker, Trump's former special representative for Ukraine negotiations, and Gordon Sondland, the US ambassador to the European Union. Witnesses have testified that Volker and Sondland, with Trump's Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry, were known as the Three Amigos, responsible for Trump's unofficial channels to Ukrainian government officials. Volker resigned as special representative in September. He testified to the House Foreign Affairs, Intelligence and Oversight panels for more than 8 hours behind closed doors on October 3rd. Sondland, a major Trump donor, testified on October 17th. Perry, the former Texas governor who said he was resigning from his cabinet post as of December 1st, has refused to testify so far. Today's will be the second public release of testimony in the impeachment investigation of Trump that Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi formally launched on September 24th. Yesterday, the committees released transcripts of testimony by Marie Yovanovitch, whom Trump abruptly recalled as ambassador to Ukraine in May, and Michael McKinley, a former top advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. In their interviews, Yovanovitch and McKinley said the State Department was being used for domestic political purposes under Trump and warned that that would hurt American interests. The House investigation is focused on a July 25th phone call in which Trump asked Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden, a leading Democratic rival, as Trump seeks re-election in November 2020. Trump froze nearly $400 million in US military assistance to Ukraine shortly before speaking to Zelensky, prompting accusations from Democrats that he had misused US foreign policy for personal gain. Strongly backed by his fellow Republicans in Congress, Trump has denied the wrongdoing and accused Democrats of unfairly targeting him in the hope of reversing his surprise victory in the 2016 presidential elections. The committee began releasing interview transcripts as they prepare for public hearings that could start this month. If the House eventually votes to impeach Trump, a trial in the Republican-controlled Senate would be held. Trump would not be removed from office unless 2/3 of the senators who are present vote to convict him, an unlikely prospect at this point. According to the accounts of their testimony already public, both Sondland and Volker discussed communications between Trump's private attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and Ukrainian officials with House investigators. Volker turned over text messages concerning Ukraine among himself, Giuliani, and other diplomats. Sondland testified that Trump directed him, Perry, and Volker to talk to Giuliani about his concerns about corruption in Ukraine, and that the three were dismayed by that order. He said he did not understand until much later that Giuliani's agenda included a push for Ukraine to investigate Biden. Sondland also said it would be wrong to get a foreign government to launch investigations in order to influence a US election. The Trump administration has directed various officials not to cooperate with the probe. Two administration officials who had been scheduled to appear for closed-door testimony did not show up today. Michael Duffy, Associate Director of the White House Budget Office, and Wells Griffith, the Senior Director for International Energy and the Environment on the White House National Security Council. 4 White House witnesses also failed to testify on Monday. Schiff said on Monday that could potentially lead to obstruction of Congress charges against the president. In Israel, Israel's highest court has upheld the government's decision to deport the local director of Human Rights Watch for his alleged support for a boycott movement, ending a long-running landmark case that questioned the country's ability to expel its critics. Omar Shakir, a US citizen, will now have 20 days to leave Israel and the Palestinian territories or face deportation, his lawyer has said. Shakir wrote on Twitter that if he was kicked out, Israel would join the ranks of Iran, North Korea and Egypt in blocking access to Human Rights Watch staff. "We won't stop," he said, "and we won't be the last." Human Rights Watch has called the government's attempts to deport Shakir, which has been going on for more than a year, a sign that Israel was seeking to suppress criticism. The Supreme Court has effectively declared that free expression in Israel does not include completely mainstream advocacy for Palestinian rights, said Kenneth Roth, the group's executive director. Shakir will be removed under a contentious 2017 law that allows the government to block entry to people who support a boycott of Israel or Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. The measure was designed to criminalise the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, or BDS, movement. Rights groups say it tramples on free speech as the law has been deployed against critics and activists. In its most high-profile use, Israel blocked in August 2 US Congresswomen, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, from a planned trip to Palestine and Jerusalem. The Democratic Party Congresswomen had previously said they support the use of boycotts to pressure governments, including that of Israel, on human rights abuses. They also sought to pass a resolution in the House of Representatives championing the right to participate in boycotts. Israel later agreed to a request by Tlaib to visit on humanitarian grounds on condition that she did not express her views on the boycott. Tlaib rejected the offer. Human Rights Watch says the Shakir case is significant as it is the first time the government has used the anti-BDS legislation to try to deport someone legally working in the country. Shakir has argued that he had not called for any form of boycott of Israel during his time at Human Rights Watch. His employer has suggested he was targeted for the organisation's opposition to Israel's Jewish settlements in the West Bank and its calls for companies to stop working with them. Human Rights Watch has pointed out it had written critical reports of human rights violations on both sides, including the arbitrary detention of journalists and activists by the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, and an extrajudicial execution carried out by Hamas's military wing. Last week, another rights group, Amnesty International, accused Israel of blocking one of its staff members from travelling abroad for undisclosed security reasons as a punitive measure against the organisation's human rights work. Laith Abu Zayad, Amnesty International's campaigner on Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, was stopped at a border crossing with Jordan while on his way to attend a relative's funeral. In Hong Kong, the Chinese Communist Party said today that it would perfect the system for choosing the leader of Hong Kong after months of anti-government protests, as police in the ex-British colony fired water cannon to break up a Guy Fawkes-themed march. The party said in a statement it would support its special administrative region of Hong Kong, which returned to China in 1997, and would not tolerate any separatist behaviour either there or in neighbouring Macau, an ex-Portuguese colony that was handed back to Chinese rule some 2 years earlier. Some protesters in Hong Kong, angry at perceived Chinese meddling in its freedoms, have called for independence in sometimes violent unrest. This has been a red line for Beijing, although China has denied interference. As the party's statement was released by Xinhua news agency, Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam said she had held a short meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Shanghai. He expressed care and concern about Hong Kong, especially given the social disturbances that we have seen in the last 5 months, and he expressed support for the various actions taken by Hong Kong's Special Administrative Region government, she told reporters. Referring to the foundation of the 1997 deal under which Hong Kong reverted to Chinese rule, Lam said, "In strict accordance with the principle of one country, two systems, we will continue upholding the rule of law and trying to put an end to the violence. The one country, two systems formula guarantees Hong Kong's freedoms, including an independent judicial system, for 50 years. Lam denied widely reported rumours that her government was considering an amnesty for protesters charged with offences, one of the demands of the protesters. In simple terms, it will not happen, she said. After gate-crashing fancy-dressed Halloween festivities on October 31st, hundreds of Hong Kong protesters marked Guy Fawkes Day on today in the Tsim Sha Tsui tourist district of Kowloon by wearing the white, smiling Guy Fawkes masks made popular by anti-establishment hackers and the film V for Vendetta among global protesters. Some protesters vandalised traffic lights in a restaurant perceived as being pro-Beijing, prompting police to move in with water cannon near the Science Museum, as they have done on many nights during 5 months of demonstrations. Some protesters were detained while others ran off. We are here to tell the government that we are not afraid of them and that they should be afraid of us, masked protester Pete, aged 27, said in front of the huge harbourfront neon Christmas decorations. Lam banned face months last month, invoking colonial-era emergency powers for the first time in more than 50 years, but protesters have largely ignored that ruling. Back in Scotland, an economic forum is being held in Campbelltown to explore economic development opportunities following the announcement of possible redundancies at 2 of the town's biggest employers. The forum will provide the opportunity for the Scottish Government to meet with Argyll and Bute Council, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, trade unions and local employers to pool resources and try to identify any scope to work collaboratively to regenerate the local economy. The summit will be held later this month. Rural Economy Secretary Fergus Ewing said, "It has been a devastating period for workers and their families who have either been made redundant already or have the threat of redundancy hanging over them. Campbelltown Creamery and CS Wind UK provide a substantial portion of the Campbelltown area's high-skilled jobs and are a vital part of the local economy. In response to the potential job losses and expected impact, these will have on the local area, we have called on Emergency Economic Summit to explore the challenges facing the local community and try to identify any potential opportunities. In the meantime, the Scottish Government continues to work with CS Wind UK to do all we can to support the company to secure future work for the site. And also in Scotland, the need for planning permission could be removed for certain types of rural developments to help tackle depopulation and support local economies. Small-scale developments such as the conversion of agricultural buildings to develop more homes in rural areas could automatically be given the go-ahead under a review of planning laws. The development of larger operational farm buildings, including sheds and polytunnels, could also be exempted. The changes are being considered as part of a new action plan to implement a radical shake-up of planning laws. Removal of planning permission for developments that help address climate change is also being considered. Planning Minister Kevin Stewart said, "Scotland's rural areas are a major source of growth, with environmental quality that underpins key sectors such as food and drink, tourism, energy, and the creative industries. That's why tackling depopulation and supporting the sustainability of our rural communities is so important. I believe these reforms will help support work aimed at increasing the rural population, will support succession planning for farmers, and will provide an opportunity for the planning system to positively contribute to the local long-term sustainability of rural businesses and communities." Permitted development rights remove the need to apply for planning permission and typically relate to minor or uncontroversial developments where planning permission would likely be granted. The Scottish Government is currently seeking views on its sustainability appraisal of options for expanding permitted development rights across 16 development types. The report sets out the likely significant environmental, social and economic effects of options for change and was informed by the views of a virtual review group of key stakeholders, such as Scottish Environment Link, National Farmers Union Scotland and telecommunications providers. The 2019-20 Programme for Government Protecting Scotland's Future highlights the key role planning has to play in addressing climate change and helping to radically accelerate reduction of emissions, and in ensuring we can sustain and support communities, including support for dynamic rural economies, in resisting the most detrimental impacts of Brexit. And that is all we've got for you tonight. We'd like to thank once again Douglas Chapman MP for joining us. He was here with us for the first half of the show. It's always good to hear from him. And we'd like to thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you too. In order to keep bringing you these programmes, as we always tell you, making TV programmes is an expensive business. And you can help by signing up right away. Go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Your £5 a month can make all the difference to what Broadcasting Scotland can achieve. Once again, that's broadcastingscotland.scot/register. If you can't afford to support us, don't worry. We will always be free to view. But if you can, then, as we say, that does make all the difference. In the meantime, I've been Kenny McBride. This has been Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. Thanks again for joining us. Good night.